Hello, and welcome to Capybuds. We are an artist collective here to entertain you. You're about to listen to our pilot series, Bite-Sized and Nerdy, currently a documentary-style podcast focused on interviewing fans and their obsessions. I started this project way back in January, but as you can probably tell, it's now June. Thankfully, with understanding guests and being a fresh graduate of my program, probably. I'm happy to say that I finally found the time to fix and edit all the episodes and will be releasing them every Friday at 12 p.m. PDT. If you like what you hear, or are even just a little bit interested in some of our other upcoming projects, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and without further ado, let's get nerdy!
You could experience that same difficulty level, but with your friends, so you could all share the pain. That was what made...
You're tuned into Bite-Sized and Nerdy with Amanda Teo. This is the podcast where we aim to serve you just a taste of the fandoms and franchises our guests are just simply obsessed with. Whether you're here to gush over your faves, or simply looking for something new, we're just so excited to have you. So sit back, relax, and let's get nerdy. Imagine a world where monsters rule the land, skies, and the sea. Villagers turn to fearless hunters to help them keep them at bay. Will you heed their call? On this episode, we introduce you to this monster-infested world.
Hey, this is Fiercest Bard, and today we're talking about Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter, like its name says, is a monster hunting game. You have an objective of going out on quests that are assigned to you by a village elder so that you can help your village grow and prosper by hunting monsters whose parts can be used to benefit the town that you live in. And as you hunt more stronger and more powerful monsters and you carve out stronger and more powerful parts from them, you can make better armor and better weapons, as well as different items that can help you hunt harder and harder monsters. And the objective of the game is to basically hunt the biggest and baddest monster at the end of each game to prove that you're the best monster hunter in the town.
But before we dive in, where did this all exactly start?
In 2004, this was around the time that PlayStation 2 was the main console in Japan. Kaname Fujioka was a director of video games for Capcom at the time, and he wanted to make a game about capturing monsters and using monster parts to build up your armor and your food and everything else that you need to survive in a world. The monster capturing genre was really popular in those days. And Capcom wanted to make a more mature take on that, where you actually kill the monsters and utilize the various parts of the monsters to create all of your gear and items that you would need to hunt the monsters themselves. The game itself was very rough when it originally came out. This game is what's known as an animation lock game, where once you press a button, you had to stand still to take items. You had to wait for the wide swings of each weapon that were very slow. Just any action you did took a long time to do. There were a lot of instances where people would get frustrated because they would end up getting killed by the monster because they pressed the button at the wrong time. You had to be very strategically thinking, even though there wasn't necessarily that level of strategy in the game in terms of capturing the monster. You still had to think about when you could attack the monster. And the monsters were always much faster than the player. They could suddenly turn around and you can be killed in 1 or 2 hits. And to not be able to move around freely was one of the big things that a lot of people didn't like. I think the cooperative part of Monster Hunter is a huge draw to it because the monsters are so hard to hunt that working together with your friends is a whole lot of fun. It's an activity that you can do as a group, and there aren't too many games that allow you to do that aren't hyper competitive. There was an earlier period of gaming where there were simultaneous play games, as they used to call them, where you would play with 1 or 2 of your friends, and sometimes if you were lucky enough to find an arcade game that supported 4 players, you could play those, but they were usually very short experiences. Where Monster Hunter is a very in-depth, long experience where you have to grow with your friends, putting in a lot of effort, and you could see the results of those hunts in the armor and the decorations that you create after each hunt. The series actually picked up a lot after Monster Hunter 2, or Monster Hunter DOS as it was known as in Japan. That was around 2005 and 2006, after the first expansion pack for the original Monster Hunter game. Monster Hunter DOS introduced a lot of new weapons as well as a lot of new gameplay styles to the series. It was the one that actually made the game series take off.
So how did Bard begin his journey into becoming a top hunter?
I actually was watching trailers from E3. E3 was the Electronics Entertainment Expo. This was the video game industry trade show. And it was in 2004, I believe, that they showed a trailer for Monster Hunter. And the trailer was really interesting because it showed the hunters basically hunting a Rathalos, which was the red dragon that flies around on the cover of the game. And all of the hunters in the game were working together to trap and ensnare the monster. And there were different weapons shown off. What kind of convinced me was that two of the hunters were using themselves as bait to lure the monster down a very narrow path. And as they jumped over a wooden log that was in place there, another hunter was hiding underneath with a giant bow gun. And they were shooting at the monster as it jumped over the log. And they tried to capture the monster. It kind of made me think about how cool it would be if you could actually do that. Up until that point, games didn't really think about using tactics to win at anything. It was all about how hard you can hit them and how fast. A lot of games back then were sort of like shooting games where you would expend tons and tons of ammo to kill your opponent. But where this one, it made it more of a thinking game, and that was really appealing to me. I was actually really excited. I bought multiple copies of the game to play with my friends. On the first day that I played the game, I was actually expecting exactly what I saw in that trailer. I wanted to be able to craft elaborate traps and use tactics to lure monsters in place and then like capture them. The first Monster Hunter did have some of that. You can capture monsters and you can use certain tactics to lead them around, but it actually fell quite short of being what was promised in the trailer, unfortunately. Eventually, every game of Monster Hunter did end up being whoever had the strongest sword just hit the monster as hard as possible and just keep doing that until it eventually dies. I played hundreds of hours of this game with my friends. It was a huge component as to why we just kept coming back. And those same friends continued to play the game and then also introduce the game to their friends and family and get more people to play the game. And we kind of grew as a community in a lot of ways that continue to play Monster Hunter even to this day.
And what about the Western reception towards this game?
The release in the West was not very popular because the PlayStation 2 had a major flaw in that you needed a network adapter to play with your friends. The PlayStation 2 didn't come built in with a modem. Anybody that wanted to play the game online with their friends needed to buy an extra piece of hardware to connect to their system. This was a huge barrier for everybody, but when the PSP version of Monster Hunter Freedom came out, that was a different story in 2005, 2006, because all you needed was the PSP. You didn't need extra hardware. As long as you had the device, you could play with your friends, at least locally. There was no online play available yet for the handheld edition. I think that Monster Hunter stood out from the rest of the pack. It was about improving yourself and the sheer difficulty of the game that's presented to you. At first, you can't seem to do too much damage to the monster, and you might fail on some of your missions when you first play the game. And that's kind of normal. The monsters are many times larger than your own character. But as you get better gear, you feel the progress that you're making as you spend a lot of time preparing for each monster hunt. And a lot of people are really into that, especially with games that are as difficult as Monster Hunter. But admittedly, the series hadn't been doing very well in the West for a very long time. Less and less people were buying the games with each new release, because while it was very popular on PSP, after about 4 or 5 editions of the game, people noticed that Capcom was making less and less improvements to the gameplay over time. That was a huge talking point amongst people who were disappointed with with Monster Hunter. Because the argument was you're essentially paying the same price every year for the same game, just with a different monster. But the gameplay itself wasn't any different. The game started to become a little bit stale. The next iteration of the game, Monster Hunter World, was when they decided to go back to the drawing board and actually listen to a lot of the players' complaints about the stale gameplay and do new things to improve it. Because they had access to newer hardware at that point, because the PlayStation 4 was actually available. Capcom actually took the time to redo a lot of the gameplay systems that they had, starting with Monster Hunter World. When Monster Hunter World was released, there was already a move for gamers to play really hard and difficult games and to persevere in those games and eventually beat them. This was something that a lot of the Dark Souls community was going through, and Monster Hunter was a lot like those Dark Souls games, only it brought that gameplay to the multiplayer arena. You could experience that same difficulty level, but with your friends, so you could all share the pain. That was what made the series very memorable for a lot of people, and I think for the gaming audience, that's what makes it continue to be very popular.
Now that you got a taste of the world of Monster Hunter, where does Bard suggest you and your friends start if you want to become a top hunter yourself?
I would say that if you're new to the franchise and you want to get started in playing Monster Hunter, you can always pick up Monster Hunter World very cheap. It's a good entry point for newer players because Monster Hunter World was created with that in mind, to be a good entry point for newer players to introduce them to Monster Hunter and how to play the game, because it has a very good beginning area that teaches everybody all the basic skills on how to get started with playing the game.
And if you want to continue the conversation with Bard,
if you'd like to talk to me more about Monster Hunter and anything gaming related or even art related, you can always find me on twitch.tv/fiercestbard.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Bite Sized and Nerdy with Amanda Teo. Did you enjoy your happy helping of fun facts? Or do our guests have info that they need to retract? Make sure to let us know down in the comments. In the meantime, thanks for dropping by, and we can't wait to see you next time.